She had everything: wealth, beauty, and the kind of life most could only dream of. Yet behind the mansion walls, behind the glittering parties and polished smiles, something darker was at play. A cruel test. A dangerous game. She chose to fake a weakness, to hide her strength, believing it would reveal her husband's true heart. But what she didn't know was that this test would shatter her world and expose the people closest to her in ways she could never imagine. Because when the man who vowed to love her turned cold, when betrayal cut deeper than any wound, someone else stepped forward. Someone the world never expected. A man society dismissed, judged by the color of his skin and the uniform he wore. A man who would show her the true meaning of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. But how does a woman born into privilege learn the value of a heart that society devalues? And what price must be paid for a truth that powerful? This is not just her story, it is a story about prejudice, betrayal, and the kind of love that refuses to die. The heiress was born into a world of glittering chandeliers, velvet halls, and the quiet hum of wealth that most could never imagine. From the outside, her life seemed perfect. Luxury cars lined the driveway, her wardrobe whispered of designers whose names were etched into history, and her every step carried the weight of privilege. Yet, beneath all that shine, she lived with an emptiness she couldn't ignore. She longed for something real. Something money couldn't buy. In a house full of servants and in a marriage framed by appearances, she began to question, was her husband's love true, or was it only tied to her fortune? That single doubt became an obsession. To silence it, she devised a plan, one that would blur the lines between truth and deception. She would pretend to be paralyzed, forcing the man she trusted most to reveal who he truly was. But as she slipped into this fragile disguise, another story quietly began to form. In the background of her world stood the janitor, a man who swept floors no one noticed, who carried burdens no one cared to ask about. He was invisible in her home, dismissed by her guests, and often judged by the color of his skin. Two worlds, one gilded, one overlooked, were about to collide. Neither knew that this test of love would spark a chain of events that would expose betrayal, prejudice, and a truth far greater than either imagined. Because sometimes the people society sees as the smallest carry the biggest hearts. And sometimes, the ones with everything have the most to lose. The test began quietly. For days, the heiress played her part, fragile, helpless, confined to a chair she did not need. At first, her husband hovered close, offering smiles that seemed gentle, supportive. He spoke softly in front of others, his hand resting on her shoulder as if to show the world he was still devoted. But when the guests left and the mansion's echoes grew still, the mask began to slip. His patience wore thin. The weight of tending to her became a burden he no longer tried to hide. She watched closely, every glance, every sigh, every delay in his touch. Her heart ached as she realized that the love she had hoped for was fading before her very eyes. The one she trusted most seemed to see her not as a partner, but as a weight pulling him down. And in those moments of isolation, another presence became impossible to ignore. The janitor. Always moving quietly in the background, sweeping, polishing, unseen. Yet he noticed what others refused to see. He saw the way her husband's eyes turned cold when no one was watching. He saw how her loneliness hung in the air, heavier than the chandeliers above her. Still, he kept his distance. He had learned, through years of struggle, that men like him were never meant to cross into the lives of women like her. He knew the risk. A black man in a white mansion was already a shadow in a place that wished he were invisible. But fate does not ask permission. One evening, as her husband stormed out in anger, slamming the door behind him, the heiress's chair caught on the edge of a carpet. She slipped, tumbling forward, helpless in her disguise. For a moment, fear gripped her. Would she expose herself? But before panic could settle, strong hands caught her. The janitor had been there, silent, quick, steady. He lifted her with a gentleness she had not felt in weeks. His eyes met hers, and though no words were spoken, she saw something her husband had never shown her, compassion without expectation. That moment sparked something dangerous. A connection society would not accept. And soon, whispers began. It started with the servants, snide remarks about how the heiress seemed to lean on the janitor too often, how his presence lingered longer than it should. Then it spread beyond the walls. In a town where lines were drawn deep between wealth and race, such closeness was not only frowned upon, it was condemned. The husband noticed, too. And where there had once been indifference, now there was rage. He accused her of shame, of betrayal, his words sharp, laced with venom. But beneath it all was a truth he could not bear to face. The love he had been too careless to give was being shown to her by the very man he despised. For the janitor, the danger grew daily. Doors that once opened easily now slammed in his face. Tasks became harsher, punishments for small mistakes harsher still. And always, there were the looks, the kind of looks that pierced deeper than words. Eyes that told him he was out of place, that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how pure his intentions, he would never belong. Still, he endured. Not because he sought love, not because he dreamed of something forbidden, but because he could not turn away from injustice. Each time the heiress's husband raised his voice, each time cruelty overshadowed care, the janitor stepped forward, not to be noticed, but simply because it was right. But righteousness does not shield a man from hate. One night, as he walked home along the back streets, shadows trailed him. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. He tightened his grip on the small bag he carried, his only belongings from a day's work. He didn't need to turn to know. He had felt this before. He had lived this before. The sting of being followed not because of what he had done, but because of who he was. A voice cut through the night, "Hey, boy. What are you doing here?" He froze. Not because he was guilty, but because he knew how quickly innocence could be twisted. His silence only fed their fury. The footsteps drew closer, rough hands shoved him against a wall, words spit like poison in his face. They accused him of theft, of trespassing, of daring to walk a street they believed was not his. He tried to explain, but explanations meant nothing when prejudice had already passed its verdict. The blows came swiftly, not just from fists, but from the cruel laughter that followed. By the time he stumbled home, bloodied but unbroken, he knew the truth: the world did not need proof to hate him. It only needed his skin. The next day, the heiress saw him, bruises hidden poorly beneath his collar, movements slower, pain etched into his face. She asked no questions, but her silence screamed. She understood more than he realized. And in that silent exchange, her world shifted. The test she had devised to measure love now seemed trivial compared to the test life had forced upon him every single day. Still, danger loomed. Her husband's suspicion grew darker. The community's whispers turned to shouts. And somewhere between loyalty and survival, the heiress would soon have to decide: would she remain silent, safe in her privilege, or would she stand beside the man whose society wanted erased? Because the line between love and ruin was narrowing fast. And the next step she took could destroy everything she thought she knew. The whispers had turned into shouts. The stares had sharpened into knives. What began as suspicion inside the mansion had spilled into the streets, into the community, into the very air they breathed. The heiress, still bound by her cruel deception, could feel the storm gathering. Her husband's coldness had grown into fury. He no longer pretended. The dinners once filled with silence now rang with accusations. He called her a burden, a fraud, though he never suspected the truth, that her paralysis was an act, a mask to test his loyalty. But what broke her wasn't his anger. It was the way he spat venom toward the janitor. Words heavy with hate. Slurs laced with poison. He accused him of taking too much interest, of crossing lines that were never meant to be crossed. To the husband, the janitor was not a man, not a worker, not a soul worthy of respect, just a target, a scapegoat, someone to blame for the love he himself had thrown away. The heiress felt trapped. Each day she kept her secret, she became complicit in the cruelty around her. Yet she feared what would happen if she spoke. Her mask of paralysis had become a prison, and now, it threatened to destroy not only her, but the only man who had shown her genuine kindness. The breaking point came one night. It was supposed to be ordinary, a gathering of wealthy friends in the mansion's grand hall. Laughter, glasses clinking, music swelling under chandeliers. She sat silently in her chair, her body still, her act unbroken. But she saw the way her husband's eyes darted toward the janitor, who stood quietly at the edge of the room, waiting for instructions. Then came the moment. The husband called him forward, his voice dripping with contempt disguised as command. "Serve them," he barked. "Pour their drinks. Show them how useful you are." The janitor obeyed, steady hands carrying a tray through the crowd. But as he passed, one of the guests, a man with too much wine and too little decency, stuck out his foot. The tray slipped. Crystal shattered. Laughter erupted. The room turned hostile in an instant. Mocking voices jeered, sharp words cut deeper than glass. Clumsy. Careless. What else can you expect from someone like him? The janitor froze. His hands trembled, his jaw tight. He wanted to disappear, to swallow his pain. But he knew, if he spoke, if he resisted, if he showed even an ounce of anger, the story would no longer be about their cruelty. It would be about his temper, his violence, his threat. The heiress's chest burned. She wanted to rise, to defend him, to scream the truth. But she was locked in her lie, trapped in her role. Her silence became another wound. Her husband seized the moment. "This is what happens," he declared to his guests. "This is why people like him should stay in their place." Gasps. Some laughed. Others shifted uncomfortably. But no one spoke. Not one voice rose in protest. And then, he struck him. A hand across the face, sharp, brutal, final. The sound echoed louder than the music, louder than the laughter, louder than the silence that followed. The janitor staggered, his dignity bleeding out with the sting of that slap. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. And then it shattered. His eyes locked with the heiress's. For the first time, her mask cracked. Tears welled. Rage burned. Shame consumed her. In that single look, he saw everything, the love she had hidden, the truth she had buried, the courage she had denied. And she knew, if she stayed silent now, she would lose him forever. The chair scraped against the floor. Gasps filled the room. The heiress rose, on legs she was never meant to have lost. The room erupted in chaos. Faces twisted in shock. Her husband's expression hardened into something darker than betrayal. "You lied," he hissed. "You lied to me, to everyone." But her voice, trembling and raw, cut through the hall. "No. The lie was yours. You vowed to love me, and you failed. You showed the world your cruelty." And he, her hand trembled as she pointed to the janitor, "He showed me compassion you never could." The crowd stirred, murmurs rising like a tide. Some shocked. Some disgusted. Some enthralled. The husband's face contorted with rage. His pride, his status, his control, shattered in a single moment. He lunged, fury driving him. But the janitor stepped forward, not in aggression, but in defense. His body became a shield. And that was when the true injustice revealed itself. Because in that hall, in front of witnesses, in the glow of wealth and privilege, it was not the husband's violence they saw. It was not his cruelty. It was the janitor who became the target. The shouts came fast. How dare he raise himself above his station? How dare he touch her, protect her, stand beside her? In their eyes, the crime was not the husband's betrayal, nor the slap, nor the years of neglect. The crime was a black man daring to stand tall in a world that demanded his silence. Guards were called. Hands grabbed him, dragging him through the hall as if he were the villain. The heiress screamed, her voice breaking, but her protests drowned in the tide of prejudice. He struggled, not for himself, but for her, his eyes never leaving hers as they tore him away. And in that gaze, she saw it, the strength of a man the world refused to honor, the courage of someone who loved without condition, the truth society tried to bury. The crowd's roar swallowed everything. Her husband's smirk cut through the noise. And the janitor, beaten but unbroken, disappeared beyond the doors. The hall fell silent again, but the silence was different now. Heavy. Suffocating. The heiress stood trembling, her world torn apart. She had revealed her secret, but in doing so, she had unleashed a storm that threatened to consume the only man who had ever shown her true love. And as the doors slammed shut, her heart screamed the question that burned in every viewer's mind. Would this be the end of his story? Or the beginning of a truth too powerful to be silenced? The mansion stood quieter in the days that followed, but the silence was not peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, heavy and suffocating, filled with the weight of what could never be undone. The heiress walked its halls, no longer pretending, no longer confined to a chair, but feeling more imprisoned than ever before. Her lie had ended, her truth had been spoken, and yet the man who had shown her the truest kindness had been dragged away as though he were a criminal. For her husband, the incident was a triumph. To the outside world, he painted himself as the victim of humiliation, his reputation carefully polished by wealth and status. He told his version of the story at dinner tables and in quiet corners of the town, twisting the truth until the lie felt comfortable to those who wanted to believe it. And they did believe it, because it was easier to condemn the janitor than to question the man of power. But for the heiress, there was no comfort in silence. Night after night, she replayed the moment, the sound of the slap, the look in the janitor's eyes, the way he had been torn from her side not because of guilt, but because of the color of his skin. She had tested love, but in the end, she had uncovered something far more painful, the ugliness of a society that punished the innocent and protected the cruel. She tried to reach him. Letters were written, inquiries made, but doors slammed in her face. No one wanted to hear her truth. No one wanted to believe that a woman of wealth could stand beside a man the world dismissed. The more she spoke, the more she was silenced. Her own friends whispered that she had lost her mind, that her sympathy was a disgrace. And yet, deep inside, she knew that her story could not end with silence. The janitor's suffering could not be just another forgotten wound. If love meant anything, if justice meant anything, she had to raise her voice. Even if the world refused to listen, she would speak. The mansion became her stage. She stood where her guests once laughed, where cruelty once echoed, and she told the truth. To anyone who would listen, she spoke of his kindness, of the compassion he had shown when no one else cared, of the brutality he endured simply for existing. Some dismissed her as hysterical. Others turned away in discomfort. But a few, just a few, heard her words and felt the weight of them. The impact was not immediate. Change never is. But whispers grew, and this time they were different. They carried not mockery, but questions. They carried not cruelty, but doubt. Seeds of truth had been planted, and though they took time to grow, they began to shift the ground beneath her husband's lies. As for the janitor, though scarred by the injustice he faced, he carried himself with the same quiet strength that had always defined him. Bruises faded, but the memory remained. He had lived what countless others had lived before him, punished not for actions, but for identity. And yet, he refused to let hatred consume him. In his silence, there was resilience. In his pain, there was dignity. The heiress never forgot. Her test had begun as a selfish act, a game to measure her husband's loyalty. But it ended as a revelation, a mirror held up to a society that preached fairness but practiced division. And though her world had crumbled, she rose from it with new eyes. Because this was never just about her. This was about every man and woman whose worth is questioned because of the color of their skin. Every life dismissed, every dignity stripped away by systems that protect the powerful and crush the vulnerable. It was about the countless untold stories that vanish in silence, the names that never make headlines, the truths buried because they are too uncomfortable to face. Her story became one of many. And in sharing it, she passed a torch, not of pity, but of responsibility. Responsibility to remember, to speak, to demand more from a world that too often demands nothing from itself. And so the question remains, one that does not belong only to her, or to him, but to all of us. How many more times will love be silenced by hate? How many more hearts must break before dignity is no longer determined by skin? The answer lies not in her mansion, not in her husband's lies, not in the cruelty of one night, but in us. Because prejudice does not fade on its own. Injustice does not erase itself. And silence, no matter how comfortable, is always a choice. So I leave you with this: if this story moved you, if it stirred even the smallest spark of anger or compassion, then ask yourself, what will you do with it? Will you turn away, like the guests in that hall, pretending not to see? Or will you stand, like he did, against the tide, even when the world tells you not to? The story of the heiress and the janitor may be finished, but the story of justice is not. It is still being written, by you, by me, by all of us. And the question is, when history looks back, whose side will it say we stood on?